I'm a technology guy, so I'm actually an engineer. And I have a couple questions for you before we begin, because this will help sort of tune my talk. Who here actually does engineering, actually works on routers and hosts machines and that sort of thing? A couple. Okay. Cool. Cool. So another thing that's kind of interesting is technology guys typically don't wear coats and ties. So I was told that I had to wear a coat and tie, so my wife bought me a new shirt. It's usually t-shirt and jeans for me. So I'm fine with this, but if I pass out, it's because it's kind of tight. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the internet's been an amazing success, right? It really has. I found this, I updated this yesterday. 3.4 billion users on the internet today. That's absolutely amazing. And of those 3.4 billion users, everyone must have multiple devices, right? So there's almost 19 billion devices that are internet connected as well. Unbelievable numbers. And it's 5.5% of the GDP for G20 countries, and the reading I did is actually, it's even more of the GDP for other nations as well. So we have a huge, huge amount of money that's now riding on the internet. When I started this, I started in 1991, and essentially no one knew what the internet was. And I was really working really hard, and one night, this is in about the 93, 94 time period, I worked for this company called Network Solutions. Anyone heard of Network Solutions? Okay. Oh, you did? Good for you. You were employee number 9. Really? They were small. They were still small when I was there. So it's Network Solutions was a really small company based in Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C. And I was working on this network information center, and we were growing the internet. And one of the things that the National Science Foundation said to us is, you need to start charging for domain names. Does anyone remember when domain names were free? If you wanted to get a com or net or org domain name, it was free. National Science Foundation said, hey, you guys got to stop, we're going to stop subsidizing this as the U.S. government. Network Solutions, you need to start charging. So I was like, okay, so I'm an engineer, and I was leading that team that was making that all happen. So since I was working so much, I was developing the billing code while sitting on the couch watching TV with my wife. And we're watching TV with my wife, and she was always kind of like, I don't know about the rest of you, but my wife's pretty much annoyed with how much I was working. And she actually said to me, all right, we were watching TV, and all of a sudden there was this Pontiac ad for this new car that was coming out, and it actually had the domain name Pontiac.com actually show up. And I said, that's it, the internet's arrived. And she said, what's that? Something.com? I don't understand any of this. Now you talk to her and everything ends at .com, .net, you know, it doesn't matter. So Mark, why isn't Google working at home anymore? So it's, you know, it's a part of everyday life now for us. And so this is really amazing. So, and we all knew that, well, we all hoped that the internet was going to take off. And there was this plan a long time ago saying, hey, look, you know, we're going to grow this thing, but we don't have enough IP addresses. People know what an IP address is? Okay. V4, 192.168.1.2, right? That's a V4 address. Anyone know how to do a V6 address? Okay. You want to go ahead and, it's a thing it's a much longer number, right? And it's much harder to say instead of 192.168. It's much, much harder to describe. So DNS is actually going to become more important as we go forward in the future because these V6 numbers are much longer, much harder to describe. So when they were doing this, when we figured out, hey, look, we need to replace this V4 address scheme, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with V6, and what we're going to do is we're just going, you know, it's really going to latch on, and the internet's going to grow, and the V4 is just going to go away before we ran out. So That's the way that they envisioned it to be. Well, in 2005, they said, well, that's not exactly sure how it's going to happen, but V6 is really going to come soon now, and it's really going to take off. Well, that's not really what's happening today. So essentially what we have is we haven't been able to make this transition to V6 before we've run out of V4. We're in a very interesting time now. How are we going to continue to grow the internet when we don't have V4 addresses? So here we have no idea what's going to go on. We're not exactly sure how the internet is going to continue to grow. We have some ideas, but it's going to be interesting. And the pressure on V4 address space is going to rise. And actually, that may help the development of V6. And well, there's one thing I want you to realize this presentation is the answer to all this is V6. But the short term is you need to have V4 and V6 to work. So the long-term goal, V6. Midterm, which we're in right now, is you need to have both. So this transition, it sort of reveals some of the ugliness of the initial architects and how they created V4 and V6. There's no backwards compatibility between the protocol families. So you have V4 and V6, and the two don't talk to each other. To make those work, you need to have your machines dual stacked. So dual stack means you have both a V4 and a V6 address on the same box, and those two IP address families don't talk to each other. And you're not exactly sure if something goes wrong. Was that a V4 problem or a V6 problem? And you actually have to call in your IT help desk, say, hey, the internet's broken, what's going on here? And they said, well, the internet's fine for me. And that might be because they're running V4 and you're running both dual stack V4 and V6, or vice versa. You're not exactly sure. So it actually creates a little bit more of a support headache. So we have to have both V4 and V6 to actually do this dual stack. We need to have these two protocol families to work, which means because we've run out of V4 before V6 has taken off, we're going to have both for a long period of time. So the idea is at some point, everybody's going to have IPv6 address, and you'll no longer need to have V4. But that's a long time in coming. And so what else are we going to deal with? So when we were starting to look at this, and we were saying, hey, we got this new protocol, let's go put this thing together. You guys, this is kind of hard to read, so I'll just sort of speak to it. One of the things that in the early days, they said, hey, look, we're going to start up V6, and if your host has V6, we'll prefer that, but it may be a disconnected island, so you won't be able to see the internet at all. So what your IT support desk would say, turn off V6 and it will just work. Internet will just work again. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And people said, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll create tunnels. Well, that created yet another issue with path MTU discovery, which is a way packets actually transit across the internet. Sometimes they need to be smaller than others. And if that notification isn't sent back to the host correctly, all of a sudden those packets just go away. And you have no connectivity. So these bridges that they put in as an intermediate technology don't work either. So it's a big issue. So that it turns out that if you're an ISP, you have two choices. One is subject your community to V6 and the issues that they have, or just wait. So what do you think ISPs are doing today? They're waiting. They're waiting. And so how do we deal with growth of the internet? Anyone have any ideas? I'd like to hear them. IPv6. But we're waiting. How do we deal with this? So, hey, this could be, you could get a Nobel Prize for this. Gnats. You must have read these slides before. So that's actually what people are doing. So people know what gnats are? Okay. All right. Okay. So people, for those at home, so you have like a cable modem, right, in your house, and then you have like a wireless router behind that. Okay. And that box is a NAT, right? So internally you have a private address, like a 192.168, that's what I use with my network. And externally you have a publicly addressable IP address. Or you may have another NAT upstream. So I was actually down in, where was I? Some island. I have to think about this a little bit. I was in Trinidad, and then I went to the university there, and we were trying to set up a V6 network so that people can actually start using it. And we were trying to set up this, do the tunneling thing, right, which isn't the best, but we were trying to do the tunneling thing. And as we were doing that, we realized that the school network was behind 4 layers of NAT. 4 layers of NAT. And you can only pop this off, getting a V6 network going off of just a single layer of NAT. So we worked with one of the guys there that knew the network fairly well to actually peel off those layers. And one of the things I asked him was, hey, look, you know, you're schooling people for the future, and the future is V6. So it would be really cool if you actually get them to actually start discovering this and starting to play with it. And he kind of took that to heart, and hopefully that's now in the infrastructure down in Trinidad. But it was just kind of interesting, the layer of NATs that are out there and people are subjected to. And it does impact services as well, right? So you have NAT, and some things just don't work. So anyway, so NATs are definitely what's being used in the meantime, but they're expensive, right? So anyone have Xbox at home? Okay. Okay. You play COD? Your kids play COD? Call of Duty? Yeah, yeah. So anyone do multiplayer games where you know you're playing against someone else? Do you get shot up all the time? You lose? You know why you lose? Behind NAT. So the ones who are winning are the ones that aren't behind the NAT. So because they don't have to go through this translation stuff. So there's definitely, you know, NATs are here to help us now, but in the future they're going to hurt us, especially when you're playing COD. So let's kind of look at this a little bit more. So why is there a little immediate need for V6? So some of the claims are not true or overtaken by events. V6 was designed in a time where security was kind of optional. The internet itself, and I'm going to give a talk a little bit later about security. Security was, frankly, an afterthought for the internet. And there's lots of protocols that don't have any security on it that really needs to have security. And so V6, when it came out, it said, hey, look, this is actually built with security built in. Well, as V4 grew and matured, it also got security. So you have VPNs, right? Security. So these things are already here. So what does that give you? The other thing is that people claim, and some people still do, is that V6 gives you better routing. Well, I'm here to say that V6 actually transits over the same fiber connections as V4. So the better routing thing, I personally don't buy. So, but there are some positive things, and there's actually only one. So, in my eyes. So one is that V6 allows end-to-end networking to occur again, right? So you can actually talk on your machine, your PC, your laptop, your tablet, your phone, and you can actually connect across the internet directly to someone else and not go through a network address translator. What does that buy you? Additional services. You might be able to play something that you can't do today because people have designed their applications to be very webified. So by webified, I mean they're running things over HTTP and HTTPS, which are the protocols used to browse the web today. Okay? That doesn't give a lot of flexibility for application developers. The other thing is that V6 has more bits. There's as many bits as there's grains of sand on the beach. So there's not a problem with running out of addresses. Actually, there may be, but by then I'm retired. I'm done. And the final thing is it's going to be cheaper per address. And that's a little foreshadowing, but that's the thing that's actually going to drive the move to v6, is when v4 gets really expensive and you're trying to grow your network, and v6 is the only alternative you have. So what is the ARIN community hearing about v6? And by the way, Turks and Caicos, you're in the ARIN region, so we're hearing it from you as well. Movement to v6 is slow, but progress is being made. There's a couple of large ISPs, and I'm going to have a couple of slides a little bit later, that are actually putting out some massive v6 deployments. There's a steady increase of v6 traffic. I used to give, I have to give like an annual report of what's going on within ARIN's infrastructure. We're dual stacked over v4 and v6, and I say, here's the percentage of traffic that we've have over v4 or over v6. And before I was talking about fractions of a percent. And now I'm talking about between 10 and 20%. So there is an increase of traffic in v6. But on the flip side, there's still a high demand for v4. So you talk to Juniper, you talk to Cisco, you talk to Alcatel, you talk to all these Lucent, you talk to the large routing manufacturers, and you ask them, what do ISPs want? They want CGN boxes. Why do they want CGN boxes? They want to grow their internet, and they want to grow it over v4. And they see this as at least an interim solution. Now, on the flip side, these CGN boxes are really expensive, and I think the vendors like that. So that's one of the reasons why they like to do it. And one of the other things that's kind of interesting is there's more and more people are turning to the v4 market. By that I mean, instead of going to a regional registry like ARIN, or going to your upstream ISP and getting v4 addresses, people are actually going out in our marketplace and buying v4 addresses, or they're renting it.
Just use two acronyms that I'm not sure what they were, GM and CGN.
CGN, and what's the other one, GM?
Yeah.
So CGN stands for Carrier Grade NAT. And what that is it's basically, it's a large-scale NAT. It's also known as LSN. And that's what ISPs put in their infrastructure. It's very similar to that little NAT box that you have in your house. It performs the same functions, it just allows for more users behind it. And GN, what's the other one? Is that on an earlier slide?
Just before CGN was mentioned, I think GM was mentioned.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure either. I may have said. Maybe I said it wrong. Did I say GM? I did. I have no idea what I meant by that. We'll figure it out. Oh, General Motors. Okay, so let's go on. So let's talk about ARIN's network. So this is a network that is near and dear to my heart. This is a network that I run. And we had a call in the early days is if you're going to promote v6, which we are, you also got to eat your own dog food. So we said, okay, we'll go ahead and eat our own dog food. So in 2003, which is a while back, we had a little secret handshake with ISP up in the U.S. and with Sprint. And we set up this T1 with them, and it was done in a very sort of hobbyist way, right? Anyone here use Linux? All right, I love Linux, man. And so all these other OSs, they're nothing compared to Linux. But anyways, so we had a Linux router with Sagoma T1 card. So that's a real hobbyist sort of thing, right? It's not a real router. Well, it depends on who you talk to. But it's a box that basically, you buy the PC, you put in the card, and it does routing for you. And we had an open BSD firewall and all these other services on it. We had these things separated because we were worried about security, that v4 and v6 really ought not to mix. And that was the sort of the idea back in the 2003 time frame. This is definitely wrong, but this is how we set it up. And we set this network up, and we had all kinds of problems with this network because it was in the very early days. But we were setting up v6 much like everyone else who was an early adopter at that time. In 2008, 5 years later, we said, okay, let's go ahead and make it this professional quality. So we actually connected at our colo, which is in Ashburn, Virginia. Lots and lots of low-lying buildings there, all filled with to the gills with machines running the internet. Amazon's huge there. So, for example, so there's all these. So we set up all these different boxes running both V4 and V6, and we made them dual stack. So, and at that point, V6 actually started becoming pretty stable and fairly good. And that's just what we're currently running today. And then what we decided to do is, hey, let's do this at our meeting networks. So let's supply V6 as well. And actually, for a little while, we said, okay, we're going to go V6 only on our network. So most of these technology conferences, frankly, people are typing away. They're not really looking up at the presenters. I totally get it, because I do the same thing. You're sitting in the back, and you're going like this. And the only time that you have people looking at you is when you say something ridiculous or the network's broken. In this case, the network's broken, right? So during the time where we say, okay, we're turning off V4 and we're going around V6 only, almost every head was popped up and watching. So V6 didn't work for a lot of users at that point. This has gotten better over time, because, okay, who's running like Windows here, right? Okay, you're running Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows 7. Okay, it has V6 on it. It's actually pretty good. Those running Macs is mostly okay. Anyone tried to run V6 on your machine? All right, I see a few nods. So Apple's and the various OS manufacturers have been working on getting V6 going for a long time, and actually are starting to get it right now. Actually, Microsoft, much I hate to admit it, actually had it right from the beginning. They did a really good job. Mac OS that the Apples run off of, actually they're playing catch up and have been missing a couple services that are critical to make this thing go. But anyways, I'm sort of digressing a little bit. But we definitely set this up, and it was a challenge. And I'm putting this out here because you need to move to V6, but it's going to be a challenge. This stuff is not easy. So I'm trying to be sort of realistic about it, right? So ARIN, we had challenges as well, because we had this mandate. Everything needed to be V6. Even if we rent a building from our landlord, and we told our landlord that your website needs to be V6 enabled. And actually, we had to get a variance on that, because they were going to kick us out if we didn't. So we've set up everything within ARIN as dual stack. Every service that we have that we provide to the community is both over V4 and V6. And we had some challenges. Middle boxes. Anyone know what a middle box is? A few of you. So when you go on the internet and you go to Amazon, or you go to Yahoo, or you go to Google, do you think you're hitting one box all the time? No, you're not. You're hitting a load balancer, which is shedding the load to lots and lots of boxes. Those boxes, those load balancers, that's middleware. That's a middle box, right? Because you don't see it, but it's actually doing some action for you on your behalf. What about when you go to a hotel? And one of the things that they ask you to do is register, right, before you can actually use the network. That's also a middle box, because it won't, until you actually go through that captive portal, they have things restricted in some way, usually DNS, right, and a bunch of other things, MAC addresses, so on. And those things are actually intercepting your traffic, so you can't go out until these things are solved. So these boxes all need to be V6 aware. And a lot of them claim that they are, but they're not. And so that's the interesting thing as you go through your purchasing process, is you got to not only say, are you V6 enabled, or do you support V6? You got to say, do you support V6? And every feature you have under V4 is also under V6. And at that point, a lot of vendors say, well, I guess not. So that's important as you go to this, as you buy your new infrastructure, because V6 is the answer to this. is that as you buy your new infrastructure now, you need to make sure that you have V6 capability in these boxes. Because these boxes, when you put them out, they're going to be in your infrastructure for a while, right? So how many years do you guys keep your boxes in your infrastructure? Long time? Till they broke, right? 10 years? Maybe up to 10 years? 5? So in 5 years, the world might be a different place. And so V6 might be something that's going to be mandatory. I personally don't want to be the one going up to my management saying, I just spent $5 billion on equipment. By the way, it doesn't support V6. We got to spend another 5. And it's before it's actually out, it hasn't, it's something that's not in the budget allocation. That would be really bad. So it's important that as you go forward, that when you say, hey, look, I'm going to buy equipment, it needs to have V6 and it needs to have a full feature set. And if your vendor can't say it does, and it'd probably be good to test it too. That is something that you need to look at. All right, so let's go on to V4 depletion. And this is one of the questions that came up yesterday is V4 depletion. And I got lots and lots of slides, so I'm going to go through these things fairly quickly. So 2015, we reached peak volume on traffics. Just got like a bazillion people coming in and say, hey, you're running out, we want some. July 1st of 2015, we hit our first unmet request where someone who came in said, hey, I want a /19, I can justify the need for a /19. The way that ARIN does things is if you can justify the need for that much space, you'll get it. In July of 2015 was the first time we said, you are justified to get this much space, but we can only have a /24. And you can get it, you could have gotten a /19. So at that point, it was actually officially over in terms of getting space from ARIN, basically on space that had not been previously allocated. And then in September 24 in 2015, we hit full V4 depletion. What does that mean? That means that there's any /24s left out of the free pool. That was it. There was nothing more left. No more V4 space available at that point. But what's interesting about this is people still came to us and asked us for space. People are still saying, oh, you have some V4, don't you? And I think what it really was is, you know how when you have a difficult customer as an ISP, and they say, hey, we want more space, and they say, oh, I can't get it, when they would say, go to ARIN. So shunt the anger off to ARIN instead. So I'm sure that played a part of it. I think another part is even though this is fairly well advertised that we're running out of V4 space, people didn't realize this. Here's some of our observations. V4 demand remains strong. Lots of questions and lots of confusion for customers. And from you, for those who have space now, it's very important for you to keep your information up to date within our database. We have a lot of customers, or there's a lot of registrations that were done in the 91 timeframe, when back in the days of old, when we were thinking the internet was going to be big. We gave out space left and right, but people then said, oh, I got the space, and then kind of forgot about it. Some people even died since then. Who knows what happened to it, but it's still out there, and you're not sure exactly who is the current holder of that space. So it's really important to keep it up. So you want V4, how do you get some? There's a bunch of different ways to do it. V4 waiting list, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Transfer market, you can buy it on the open market. You can get space from this special V4 block to facilitate your V6 deployments internally. You can only get a /24 from us, which is 254 addressable nodes. Or you can adopt V6, which is the long-term goal. Oh, so waiting list. So this is for those people who want to, hey, I got this justification. I can get a /19, which is a lot and lots of IP addresses. And I'm going to just wait until I can get that much space. So what I want to do is be put on a waiting list. So when it comes available within ARIN's with ARIN's inventory, I can get it. So, which is cool. But if you look at it, there's lots and lots of people already on there. So you have lots and lots of people actually on there. So over 300 people currently waiting for IP addresses on this waiting list. So you say, okay, well, what about where do I get the space from? It's either space that's returned or revoked from non-payment. We have people actually that are actually not paying their bills, and so that space goes back in the free pool and goes to the waiting list. Or it's redistributed from IANA. So, Albert, I'm not sure, did you show the allocation hierarchy?
We just mentioned the RIRs.
Okay. So at the very top of the tree is ICANN. And the regional registries each has a specific region within the world. And these ICANN actually has this centralized pool that they allocate fairly to the various regional registries, who in turn give it to their customers within region. And there's a little bit of space left. It's crumbs, but you can still get space there, or there's going to be another. There's going to be another dividend of that fairly soon. So as I mentioned, there's 300 people already on there. 27 have been fulfilled, and that was essentially done at one time when ICANN actually had the space. They flushed it out of their system, gave it to each of the regional registries. Immediately, a lot of these people actually knew what they're doing on the waiting list, and space was given out to the top 27 recipients. So demand is definitely far greater than availability. So here's another way of looking at it. This is on the website. I'm not going to go through this too much. So what I'm going to talk about is the market, and I want to spend a little bit more time here. So if you want space, you can still get it, but you won't have to go on the market. And there's really essentially two things that you can do. I have three listed here. ARIN works by policy. Policy is actually developed by the community. The community is you. So if you wanted to come to an ARIN meeting or participate on the mailing list because you think something's unfair, you can actually present a policy to fix that unfairness. The community takes a look at it and makes a decision whether or not it's put into the policy process. We call this the NRPM, the NRPM, okay? And this is a list of policies that ARIN staff follows. We're the executor of this policy. We have nothing to do in terms of implementing or actually developing this policy. It's you guys. So like when we go to meetings at ARIN, in these ARIN meetings, you will never see me actually stand up to say why we should implement this policy or we ought not to. That's really the community's decision. ARIN has nothing to do with it, other than actually implementing it. So the three types of ways that IP addresses that are out there today can move. First one is mergers and acquisitions. Okay, you buy a company, you get their assets. Part of their assets is V4 space. That goes along, gets transferred. It's not a big deal. The more interesting ones are 8.3s, which is transfers to specified recipients. That's where things are basically bought and sold within region, right? So you buy these IP addresses from another ISP in North America. Or you buy them from Trinidad. No, it's actually Trinidad's out of region. You buy them from Barbados. You can actually bring them into TCI here, and off you go. So, there may be a way that, hey, I want to get these IP addresses, and they're from Europe. And that's called an 8.4 transfer, where it's done from regional registry to regional registry. So you have your in-region transfers that are within the ARIN region, or your out-of-region transfers that are done through an inter-RIR transfer. So these transfers actually are taken off. And here you can see that you're starting to see the emerging marketplace on people buying and selling IP addresses. And this is all done within region. All right, so is that pretty cool? Inter-RIR transfers are a little bit funnier. And that is, ARIN has this rule that you have to have reciprocal policies dealing with justified need. Because what you don't want to have happen is that someone comes in and say, hey, I want to capture the marketplace. I'm going to buy all these things, even though I don't have any need for them. ARIN has said you got to have a reciprocal need-based policy that you need to follow, so that when we move our space out of the ARIN region into this European region, which is called RIPE, that you're not cornering the marketplace. So what we have here, if you look at it, is a much more sort of jagged uptake on transfers out of region. Our first one was dealing with APNIC, which is in the Asia Pacific region. They were the first region to actually run out of IP addresses. We were the third region. RIPE was the second, which is the European region. And we had this transfer policy first with the Asian region, and there was a lot of IP addresses moving out of ARIN into the Asian region. Most recently, there's transfers moving from the U.S. and the Caribbean to Europe. Very little is coming in. Most of it is going out. So anyways, hopefully that answers some of the questions in terms of what's happening in the V4 space. We're starting to see movement in terms of the marketplace, both within region, which is pretty hot, and things going outside the region, which is starting to take off. So now let's talk about V6. So this is V4 space. It's here. You can buy it. It's going to become more expensive. As the demand goes up, price will go up. Right now, we think the price for buying an IP address is. Anyone have any ideas? So what do you think? It's about $10 per IP address. So if you want a /24, which is 256 addresses, you're going to pay $10 per IP address. Okay? Now, that used to be essentially free. You pay ARIN services a little bit. But that's the current price for IP address. Now, you multiply that by the number of IP addresses you actually need in your network. That gets to be kind of expensive, and the price is going to go up. And there are various sites across the internet that's actually starting to track this. Right now, you could do a Google search. You're probably better at it than me. And you can actually see what the price per IP address is actually going for. And it's actually, it changes. And I'm sure it will continue to change. So what people are saying is, okay, V4 is here. We realize it's going to get more expensive. Let's really get this V6 network underway. So there's a lot of, there's one large scale provider in the US, Comcast, which has a pretty significant market share, is actually putting out V6 in their entire network. And they're actually almost single-handedly, along with the content providers, making differences on V6. So in the US, they now claim that almost 26% of the US has V6 connectivity. That's pretty amazing. I'm unfortunately not on Comcast network. I don't have V6 connectivity, and I'm not sure when my upstream ISP is going to have it. For me to do V6, I actually have to run a tunnel. And I talked about tunnels earlier, they're kind of crap. Okay, so this is Facebook. And you can see that they're starting to see the results of Comcast's rollout of V6 and whoever else is doing it. So it used to be, like I said earlier with ARIN's network, it's actually kind of following our network as well. It's at 1% in 2012. It's now over 10% of users coming to Facebook is coming over V6, which is pretty significant. So I think this is kind of interesting that we're starting to see this changeover occur. We've been talking about for years, and now it's starting to occur. So why move to V6, and when do you think it's going to happen? The big thing is talking about the tipping point. So when is the tipping point going to be so great that people are going to say, I want V6, I don't want V4? It's going to be cost basis, or it might be social basis. So my competitor's doing it, so I better do it too. So those seem to be the two things that it's going to drive it. The question is when. And maybe you can get a Nobel Prize for actually figuring this out. Or definitely some money someplace. there's a lot of conjectures, a lot of people saying certain things about whatever. It's definitely out there when this is going to occur. And the other thing it's going to be is that V6 it's going to make your network less complicated than V4 over time, because those CGN devices in your network, it's going to cause problems for your COD gamers, and they're going to get ticked off because they're always getting mad because they're always getting knocked off, right? And they're going to call your help desk, and they're going to say, hey, look, why is my network so slow? What are you guys doing wrong? Why can't you get this fixed? And or it maybe than that, your CGN box is broken someplace and you just didn't realize it. And every support call costs a lot of money, and especially if you have to go into your CGN box and try to figure out what's going on. That's not simple stuff. So those things I think are going to be sort of the drivers for V6. We've been talking about it for a long time in terms of V6, do it for the goodness of the internet. Now we're talking about it in terms of, hey, look, it's going to cost you money, and everybody else is doing it, so it's time for you to do it too. I'm not saying do it now, but make sure that the boxes that you have it are fully capable of running V6, so that when this tipping point does occur, and who knows when it's going to be, is that you can tell your boss, yeah, we're V6 enabled, and give me a raise. Okay, so V6 checklists. Get your V6 address space. Do it now. Well, it's pretty easy. Set up your V6 connectivity so you know what's going on. Has anyone actually run V6 here? Has anyone ever set it up? So Columbus Networks, for example, had a really good V6 setup, and they were rolling it out to various islands, and they were doing a really good job of it. I'm not sure what happened since the merger, where it stands, but that was within region. They were starting to hit islands with V6, and doing a pretty good job of it. Configure your operating systems, software, network management tools, and all this other stuff to do V6. Making sure it's all there. Making sure accounting systems actually understand V6 as well. The middle box is your router, your firewall, and all the other hardware needs to be supported V6. So everything needs to support V6 end to end to make these things go. Staff training is really important. These things are it's a little bit complicated at first. Saying, okay, going from a dotted quad to a much longer number, how do I recognize those things? And there's different types of IP addresses, or V6 addresses as well. And then, of course, enable V6 on your website. So, and when you talk about enabling V6 on the website, what do? You publish Quad A records, which is DNS, and it's a way of signaling DNS whether or not you have V6 capability. It's using a Quad A. Be reachable over a V6 connection. Make sure your hosting provider and your upstream support V6, and serve DNS over V6 as well. Here you can see addresses over a lifetime. In 2012, there seemed to have been a lot of awareness on V6 space. And you say, why is it going down? Why, with this run out, don't you think people will start preparing themselves? And one of the reasons why this is true is because V6, you get such a huge amount, you never have to come back. You get this huge amount of space that you can actually use for your network. And you don't have to come back to ARIN, so you don't have to do the subsequent requests. And so it's basically one and done. And so all these are all ones and dones as you go through this. And here's another slide that shows, hey, look, with the dotted red line here, you can see that's when Rana actually occurred, and there was a lot of interest at that point with V6, and it's starting to slide down again. Here you have members of ARIN who have both V4 and V6. It's becoming quite close in terms of those who have V4 only and who have both V4 and V6. The ones who have V4 and V6 are larger scale ISPs. Actually, when Comcast looked at this and said, this is unfair, this is an unfair graph. You should show those who are actually really pushing the traffic and whether or not they have V6. And sure enough, they are ones that do. Now you may want to say, okay, so what's happening in the Caribbean? And you can see that essentially, and this slide admittedly is a little bit old, but you can see that the Caribbean is actually following almost everybody else as well in terms of who has V4 and V6. So there's a lot of ISPs that are in the Caribbean that do have their space. But we've lagged behind the other regional registries. There's 5 regional registries in the area. And you can see that, like, for example, LACNIC, which does Latin America, parts of the Caribbean and South and Central America, 83, almost 84% of their ISPs actually have V6. 76% within the European region, but only about 50% here in the ARIN region. So you can see that there's varying degrees of usefulness as we go forward in this. This slide is here for just data. Getting V6 is really easy. If you have V4 space, you get V6 space, no questions asked. Here's basically data that we typically ask for. Just tell us number of serving sites, number of customers served, and the blocks that you plan on using. And this is all fairly self-explanatory as you go through it. For end users, if you have V4 already, you can get V6 or intend on multi-home. It's actually very simple to get V6 from us if you're interested. Much easier than V4. Okay, best practices. So as you go through this, you'll say, well, I'm going to treat this exactly how I treated V4 addresses, how I'm going to allocate this. Actually, it's not true. It's a wholly different. It's a different framework, and various people have actually say, "Hey, look, what we need to do is we need to set up this framework for people to realize how you need to reset your mind on setting up IPv6 addresses." And so there's a global document that's being put out that's actually, and I'm going to give a reference to it in a moment, that allows people to say, okay, this is how I need to set up my V6 network. Here's how I set up my addressing plans, which are really important. And here is the page for it. So these slides are going to be made available at some point, right? So people don't have to write these down. And if you want some operational guidance, here's a number of other URLs. This is just all reference material. Actually, I need you guys to write this down really fast because I'm going to speak really. So here's some other archives. Here's even more stuff. So there's tons of reference material that's available to make these things go. So as you go through it, you're going to see a lot of this stuff is actually kind of easy, even though you haven't done this before, because other people have done it and actually have captured this information and made it possible for you to actually set up your networks fairly well. So I am done with this. Actually, I have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Let's give Mark a round of applause. And I think we need another round of applause for his wife, for how good he looks in that jacket and tie. Okay, so we'll take a few questions, but I have maybe a request for just a quick explanation of the /12 and /19 and /24. I know you explained it a little bit, but maybe for some in the audience.
Okay. Okay, sure. The internet, originally when the address plans were set up, and I kind of referenced this really quickly towards the end with V6. One of the important parts of when you set up your network is you have an address plan. So how many hosts you have, how many of these different devices connect to everything else. Everybody needs an IP address. And it's really important as you set this up, you set this thing up in a way that you consider growth. In V4, they had essentially, originally you had Class A, Class B, Class C networks. Anyone remember that from your networking classes? Yeah, okay. A Class A network was a /8, which is way too big. This is kind of like the Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear business. So a Class C was a /24. Okay, that bed was too soft. And the Class A was basically a /8. That one was way too hard. So the Class B space was a /16. that space was about just right. And ISPs were coming to us and say, we want a class B. And because that space is about right, because I have more need than a /24, which is 254 addresses. I want to have 65,000 addresses. Okay, that's actually more than that. I want 65,000. No, and now my math is getting
65,536.
yeah, hosts. Thank you. So I need a lot more IP addresses, and so the Class Bs were running out. So what the ITF, which is the standards making body for the internet, said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make this sliding scale, where you have this mask on this your network, okay, and when you talk about /19, that means everything. A IPv4 address is 32 bits, okay? And there's the network section and the host section. And the original part was it was fixed, right? You had your 24 bits of a network, and your last 8 bits were host. A Class B was 16 bits of network and 16 bits of host. And then the last one was 8 bits of network and 24 bits of host, essentially. So they realized that was way too restrictive. What we wanted to do is sort of spread the spectrum, so you can have, based on your need, you can get the amount of space you wanted. So you can get a /19, which was 19 bits of network, and now 13 bits of host. Boy, it's too early in the morning. I haven't had enough coffee. Okay, so anyways, that's kind of a little bit of a little bit of a sort of a high level how these things work. And the network part of that is actually what you advertise to everybody else on the internet, saying, if you have this number of bits that match, send the traffic my way. So hopefully that was good.
I see one hand at the back. I also see the gentleman who asked the question yesterday about IPv4 and IPv6. So he may have a question, but we go to the back. Please remember to identify yourself.
This is Jane Coffin from the Internet Society. And so, Mark, I just have a question for you. If someone in the room wanted to start to move to V6, pardon? Well, yeah, it's free. You just get the address space. You may have to pay a little. Well, you're a big company, or Digicel. Don't start with me. You better be running V6 somewhere. Yeah. In any event, if people want to participate in a neutral forum, do you have a list where people can help them offline? Because I've seen really great training that goes on online just among some of the people, and I think ARIN does help facilitate that, and it's free. And I used to watch it when I did some of this work a long time ago. I'm not Mark, but I used to do some V6 work, and it was interesting to watch all the experts online helping each other, and sometimes they take it offline so that you don't feel embarrassed if you want to ask a question.
That's true. So actually there's as many venues as you want. So the simplest is hostmaster@arin.net. So if you want to ask a private question, you can go ahead and send mail to the hostmaster, which is our centralized help desk for ARIN. You can also, if you like social media, we're there. Just search for ARIN, and actually you can ask a question over social media. You can go on Facebook, you can go on Twitter. I don't think maybe you don't want to ask the question on Twitter. But you can ask your question all over the place in terms, and ARIN's there and can help actually help set the where you wanted to go and what you wanted to help with. ARIN can actually help you by doing so. It's actually, there's also, if you want to Google this, Team ARIN is yet another site. So you have Team ARIN, you have hostmaster@arin.net for email, and you have social media, which you can go to. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for those who have questions to help find the answers. We may not have the answers, but we know where to go for you to find the answers.
Any
Good
other
question.
questions? One thing I really would like to recognize as far as ARIN is concerned is that ARIN has been very supportive of stakeholders in the Caribbean. ARIN has a certain number of policy meetings every year, and in rotation, one of those meetings actually comes to the Caribbean. ARIN's next meeting is actually going to be in Montego Bay, Jamaica, from the 17th to the 20th of March. And one high point of what ARIN has been doing for the Caribbean is they've increased the number of fellowships where your airfare and your accommodation is paid to attend an ARIN meeting for the Caribbean from 1 person to 5 persons. And if you go to ARIN's website, you can actually see what the process is and what the dates are for applying to get one of these fellowships. And it's a competitive process, but ARIN has a panel which selects persons from the Caribbean to attend. So I think, unfortunately, the process for the Jamaica meeting is already closed. There are 5 fellows who've been selected from the Caribbean, but ARIN's meetings are also webcast, and they can be followed online as well, just like this one is. If there's no other question, I have another question. Oh, yes.
Just to follow on what Albert's saying, those fellowships are for every ARIN meeting, not just the one that's in Jamaica here in 2 months. And I'll be very frank in saying that there's not a lot of demand. So if you live in region, you want to go to an ARIN meeting, you want your expenses paid for, you want to see how this policy process is done, submit your application, and you have a really good chance of getting it. I think our fall meeting is going to be in Dallas, which is a pretty nice city. So anyways, thank you, Albert, for that.
Right. Good morning. My name is Ian Oswood, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Telecommunications. You mentioned earlier that I guess from where you stand or from your data, there is a transfer of IP addresses from the ARIN region to the AP region, and I think you said from the U.S. as well to and ARIN to the Europe region. My question, certainly from a government standpoint, is this something that the region, governments within the region should be concerned of? Is it reflective of an economic move that you'll have these IP addresses now being moved out from the region to the AP Asian and Pacific region, or is it, what is the cost behind it?
So that's a really interesting question. So the very beginning of the internet, actually the epicenter of the internet was North America. And the initial allocations that were made in those very early days were things that would not be done today in terms of amount of space that was given out. North America has, or the ARIN region in particular, has a huge amount of space compared to the other regions, mainly based on those earlier historical allocations that were done that predate, they were done in the 80s. So, and those predate ARIN, which was it started its operation in 1997. So there's a huge amount of space that's in North America, and it's being sort of redistributed to people essentially that are willing to pay the price to make it a go. And that first started out in the APNEC region, or in the Asia region, and just recently started within the European region, when they sort of made their policies actually meet ours, and so space started flowing that way. Now, most of it's been flowing out, but interestingly enough, some of it's been flowing back in, but a majority of it's been going out. And it's not just the U.S., it's not just Canada. I mean, this is a regional thing, so it could come from anyone who has space, down in the Caribbean as well. So it's there are countries. If you, on the flip side, now I'm going to get myself in a little bit of politics and probably in trouble. There are some countries that once it goes in a region, you can't get it out. South Korea, for example, had a law in the books that if that space is in Korea, it stays in South Korea. But that I think they're in the minority. Is there anyone else that you think of, Jane, that has that? Oh, China as well. So there's there's certainly rules in place that for certain countries, but not for a majority of the world. But good question. Good question.
Mark, I have a related question. There's some providers who sort of originate in Europe, who are operating in the Caribbean. Now, Europe is covered by RIPE, and then you come to the Caribbean and you offering services in a region that's partly covered by ARIN and partly covered by LACNIC.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the implications? Because I mean, there are mobile providers from Europe who are here, there are landline providers as well.
Yeah.
What goes on with that kind of situation?
Yeah. So the craziest island is St. Martin and St. Martin. So half the island's in the ARIN's region, half of it is in LACNIC's region. And the part that's in the ARIN's region is actually French, and it's actually served by the French telco. And I'm sure they get their space from the European equivalent of ARIN, which is RIPE. So it's the most bizarre sort of situation that way. What's interesting is if you go to a Caribbean meeting that's in the LACNIC region, they want space from ARIN. Why do they want space from ARIN? Because they think that you can get better Netflix coverage. So that's one of the things which is sort of interesting, and it's actually a competitive advantage disadvantage for ISPs that market various IP ranges, as what kind of services can you get from the states. So it's interesting. It's interesting.
Okay, so I'm looking around the room. I don't see any other hands going up. We've reached the end of the. Oh, Shannon has a question. Sorry.
Just a question. If someone is, for example, in LACNIC region, and they would like to go to ARIN meeting, region, is that possible?
We will refer them to the LACNIC region, to LACNIC, if they're from the LACNIC region. And it's the way that the regional registries was set up years and years ago, and there's these service regions, and we try to honor the service regions.
Yes, but if a provider would like to say, okay, I don't want to be in LACNIC region, I would like to be in ARIN region, is that possible?
If they have an office in the ARIN region, they can certainly apply for address space from that office. So, and yes, things get complicated when it's international sort of, multinational sort of companies, but there are allowances have been made and will continue to be made for those who can get space from that region if they have some sort of presence within that region. That's a good question, though.
So I think. Oh yes, another question. Do we have a microphone for the remote participants?
Hi, good morning. My name is Russell Gardner. I'm the engineer for the Telecommunications Commission. My question is there still a need to utilize NAT with IPv6 addresses, seeing that there is an abundance of those addresses? And if not, what impact would it have on the security on the network devices?
Good question. So V6, it gives you some enhancements. It also causes some challenges, especially with security. For example, your firewalls that you have in place. Right now you have rules for V4. Here are the things I will allow access to in my network from outside. You need to have equivalent rules under V6. And since the two protocols don't talk to each other, you have to have those rules in your network. So you need to make sure that the configurations are exactly the same, which is administratively more work. So yes, there are security implications of making V6 happen in your network. So actually, this is a little bit of a side note, and I'll probably end on something hopefully make you smile. Well, I don't know if it make you smile. It made me kind of sad. So anyone ever suffer a denial of service attack here? No? No. So ARIN has, and it's always a pain in the butt, because it always happens at the worst time. And so we had a denial of service attack last week, and it was over V4, and they really came down. They came down hard trying to hit one of our networks, and we were thwarting at every attempt, filling our pipes. It was at one point, it was about 50 gigabytes of traffic coming at us. So we got rid of it and stuff like that. And I think when V6 really takes off is when you start seeing these DDoS attacks over V6, of which we have not seen. But we've seen plenty of V4 DDoS attacks. Hasn't been any that I know of on V6 that's been large scale. But there's been plenty of them under V4 that have large scale. And you're not immune from DDoS attacks. So entire countries have been taken offline before. So.
Okay, so I think let's take one final question, and then we'll end this session.
Good morning, this is Brian, the doctor from People's Telecoms. Is there any way or any sort of plan that ARIN is doing right now to reclaim unused IPv4 that big companies bought before?
Oh, this is a good question. Reclaiming space we're doing it on essentially for non-payment. We're not doing it on space that was, like, for example, given away before ARIN was conceived, or when it started operations. There was a lot of space that was given out that people say, hey, look, you're not using very much of it, so why don't you give it back to ARIN so that it could be utilized more efficiently, right? That's really essentially what you're asking. Yeah.
Especially the /8.
Yes, yes. And those things were done in the early 80s or in the mid 80s. Those allocations were made in the mid 80s. And there's no plans right now to actually try to reclaim that space. What various organizations have done, Stanford is a good example of this. They originally had a /8. They gave it back, and it was redistributed out. But there's been no forcing function by a regional registry or by anyone else for that matter to say you need to give back that space because you're not utilizing it correctly. Once they have it, they got it, especially from the legacy's perspective. Good question, though. Really good question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Let's give him another round of applause.